yourself to someone new. Dance like you've got it all figured out. Let's get down like go-getters, play it cool. Always know you are loved, you are loved.
You know, when you start with your first instrument, as we did with OP1, we had this passion to just build something, you know. So it was a lot of our first ideas, you know, into one little device, and then it's much harder to make the second product, because the second product you do defines a little bit more who you are. So that's why we didn't do a synthesizer, we did a speaker instead. Just to, you know, like do something completely different to, you know, keep our minds open a little bit more, I would say. And then we went back to synthesizer because we love synths. So the second product is the most important one because that defines who you are. It's a little bit like your behavior. If you behave bad, you know, the first time it's okay, but if you do it the second time, it's not okay, you know. And the other way around. But so I can tell you a little story about how the OP1. I'm not sure if everyone here have know what it is, but it's like a small portable synthesizer. And the story behind it is that I told that to Gil also today, that it started when I was like 12 years old. So imagine that product development process. Now I'm 47 now, but it started when I was 12, 13, and that was 1983. And my brother worked in a music store, which was closed in the week during the weekends. So I went there every Friday afternoon and borrowed a lot of stuff. And imagine, you know, like 1983, you had a Porta Studio, you had a couple of Boss pedals, and some kind of affordable Japanese synth. Could be a 303, a drum machine, or I remember the SH101. So I borrowed all the stuff that I could carry, more or less, and played with it over the weekend. And many years later, I started to work with Electron, that makes drum machines and synths as well. And I started to help them design their products. And then, you know, my kind of passion for synths started to grow again. And I remember, you know, like the old memories I had from those weekends with the instruments from my brother's store. And so I started to do sketches on a small portable synth with all those features, like the Porta Studio, some Boss pedals, and the synth. And that eventually became like the OP1. So when you look at the OP1, it is actually exactly that. It's like a Porta Studio with 4 tracks only. We could have added like 8 tracks, but we kind of liked the limitations of it. And we have some very simple effects, a delay, a reverb, a filter, and it's basically like Boss pedals, and some synths. Also very, you know, like simple ones, like a 4-operator FM synth, and it's very basic. But when you combine all these, it's like endless. It's a little bit like a modular synth, in a way. So that's one part of it. Then what we added that was new, and I've seen a lot of stuff that here today that is, you take an instrument like a guitar, for example, and then you try to update it with electronics and stuff like that. What we didn't do that with electronics, but we did that with portability. That was our main focus. We want all that stuff, because remember then that I had to carry all these pedals and stuff, and I was quite small. I had to carry that home every weekend, and it was quite heavy. So the OP1 is all about putting all these things together in a smaller package. So I brought a new machine today that I want to show you, and it's quite interesting to me because it's if OP1 is all this like tools, like a multi-tool in a way, the new machine is all about sequencing. And I kind of try to have this, like, carry memory with me when I do. Of course, I don't do the machines myself, but I'm kind of like a creative leader. But I try to carry just like a single memory, like the thing with my brother when I do a product. Something that I can relate to during the development process, and I can, like check. It's a little bit like a checklist. If I get the same gut feeling when I play with it as I had when I was 12, or so this is quite interesting. This is a totally different approach in a way. See if I have it here somewhere. I had a friend. It's a little bit in the same time period as my brother, but my brother had a friend, and he was studying engineering. And I remember we went in the car together a lot, and he always brought his scientific calculator. It was Texas Instrument, HP. Yeah, it had a little display, but it had a keypad with a lot of symbols on it. And he was very, very proud of that little scientific calculator, and he showed us a lot of tricks. He could draw like a sinus curve and some graphical stuff. He could do some basic programming on it as well. So like 2 or 3 years ago, we decided, okay, we need to do a follow-up on the OP1, but we need to make a copy of it. It's done. We have done that. We don't want to update it. So what can we do? So one of the weakest point of the OP1 is sequencing. And then I started to remember this guy, my brother's friend. His name was John. I don't know, it was like a double John. And this little device he had in the car, and I was quite impressed by it. I didn't know. I kind of like machines that you look at and sometimes you don't know what they're used for. It looks really cool and smart, but you don't know how to use them. So this is an early version of our next machine. It's called the OPZ. And it looks like this. And it's about half the size of the OP1. And I will do a little kind of demo now. I will not try to make me. I've seen a lot of great performances today, and I'm not a great performer, but I will try to explain a little bit how we've been thinking about this, and keep in mind this guy John when I'm doing the demo, because it's like imagine him sitting in the backseat of the car with his HP scientific calculator. So I will try to explain a little bit. Now I need a 3.5. So. If you look at it, it's a little bit. It's a gray, boring looking machine with a lot of keys and a lot of symbols. And what we tried to do with this, it doesn't have any display as well. So I think a lot of our OP1 customers will be super disappointed by this machine. In a way, and I kind of like that also, that it's like. When you do an instrument, it's kind of a dialogue with the users. some might not like it. Some new people will enjoy it. So, but we do it for ourselves. So basically, it's a 16-step sequencer. But every step can be programmed with all these symbols you see over the keys here, which means that you can actually do a complete sequence in one step. And I will try to do that. So I will not use the rest 15 steps. I will do like a beat on just one step. And besides the 16 steps, it's also 16 tracks. So it's 8 instrument tracks with a dedicated kick drum track, dedicated snare, percussion and sample, bass, lead, arpeggio and chords. And then it has 2 effect slots, mixer and tape, and some extra stuff. So okay, I start now. I start with the bass, or the kick drum. I don't hear anything. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, I select the empty pattern. Yeah, it sounds thin. Okay. Any questions so far? It's going to be released September last year, right?
Last September.
Yeah. Oh, now it sounds better.
Okay, good.
You can crank up the volume a little bit.
Thanks.
That's yeah. So I will do some really basic stuff here. I think it's called like 4 on the floor thing with the kick. So I select the instrument, select step 1, and I make sure that this track is only 1 step long by pressing 2 keys and say, okay, it's 1. I have some swing on it as well, so I turn that off. Okay. Now it's like, what do you say, like a 16 note, 1/16, right? But then I can change the speed of that track. So all tracks have individual speeds. So I say that this is like a 1/4 of the speed. Okay. And I have the snare. Select this sound. I actually make this, and now I can start to program this step. I make it 1 step long as well. And then I program this step to only play every second time. I try that. And then I change the speed to half the speed. So still this sequence is only 1 step long. And then I go to the hi-hat. I can have that running, you know, like this. Sorry, 1 step long. And then I add some bass to it. And select bass sound. Like this. 1 step. And then I can add like a ramp to that. Or random. So now I added a random and a ramp up. I I can mute the hi-hat. Add arpeggio. This is still on the development. It's a little bit when you do arpeggio on one step, it's a little bit, so I make it 2 steps long. Oh, it was muted. So it sounds really, really bad, but you get the idea that every step can have like multiples. So you add like, what do you call it, operators or something, like something that, or modifiers to one step. That could be like a multiplier, it could be spaces, ramps, random. It could also change the parameter things. But the basic idea is what we worked on was that how could you push the sequencer one step further, and in a way keep the 16th. It's a little bit like when you do instruments that people actually going to use. You have to keep in mind that they are used to something like a 16-step or a sequencer concept. So you don't want to go too far. You have to keep something that they feel familiar with, but still add something. So that's a little bit how we worked, trying to keep the good stuff, but add new stuff that are actually useful, and that's the hard thing to do. So let me see if I find a pattern here that sounds a little bit better. Maybe this one. And we're also really fans of tape, because we one of our like we say visions or mission is to see if we can turn the tape into a musical instrument. And so we have a tape function that records everything. It's like a hybrid between a tape and the sequencer. So it records, turns the sequence into an audio file. So if I go to the tape and starts to play this. So what it does, it's what say, real-time records the whole sequence part and turns that into audio file that you can mess around with. So this machine is all about sequencing, and one thing that a lot of like modular users like Suzanne will like is that this will also have CV out, media out, and in. So it's the idea behind this machine is that you can have it in your inner pocket. As I was traveling yesterday, flight from Stockholm to Atlanta, and actually compose on it. I'm not a composer, but if I was, I could actually compose on it and plug it into just plug it in with a 3.5 and have more or less a complete performance on one little device. You can also have it has a built-in mic as well. You can sing in it. And you can also sequence the effect of the mic. So yeah, this is the OP set. You cannot do a lot of more stuff on it. You can actually sequence lamps as well. I've seen a lot of you today that like incorporate LED lights into your instruments. which I think is quite interesting, but it's not easy, but because you get tired faster of like visual stuff. I don't know why, but if you see repeating images, you get bored much faster than with sound, which is quite interesting. But you can control lights with it. You can also control video stuff, so it connects to Unity, the 3D engine. And we will release a toolkit for it so you can do your own back projection. So the idea we had with this, except for this John guy that was in the back of the seat with a scientific calculator, is that if I was a composer, I could sit on the plane from Stockholm here with just this machine, go up on stage and do a complete performance in a size like this. So still, we try to be true to our what do you say, passion for making instruments as small as possible, and see if that works. It's an experiment in a way, you know. We don't have a business plan for a company, so we try to just explore things that we would like to see. So, any questions?
How was the start? You have a team, and like how many people are today? Like how it was in the beginning, like first people, then other people, or creating as a group. How?
So on the OP1 we were 4 people, basically 3 engineers, 2 software engineers, 1 hardware engineer, and I did the design. And on this machine we're also we have a core team. I would say, you know, like 4 people on this one. Well, that's why it takes quite a long time. But what we discovered is that when programmers start to work on the same project, they have fight over, you know, code things and stuff like that. It doesn't work anyway. So it doesn't matter if you're 10 people. It will be, you know, like end up with the same development time anyway, you know, because they rewrite the code. So we try to keep the team small, and it usually starts with we build a lot of prototypes at our studio that can you know, I have a table in my room where I put all the prototypes, and it's a little bit like an experiment, like a social experiment. So I watch when people come in, I watch what they pick up from that table. If more than, you know, like 50% of the people pick up a certain machine, I know there's, you know, like there's some kind of attraction, and then I start to push that one. And some of the models or the prototypes or the mock-ups that we do, people completely ignore, and they just automatically die, you know. So it's a little bit like this competition. I guess at least one person will get the first prize, and the rest will die. No, no, I was just joking. No, but I think, you know, like
I hear that people who finish second
sec.
do pretty well at that.
That's yeah, we were second. So usually the winner doesn't take it all, you know. But yeah.
I remember a box that Yamaha made back. Richard Boulanger introduced me to it. It was really kind of big, but it was sort of the same idea. It had a little MIDI keyboard on it, though, but it was a personal sequencer that you could use to compose.
Yeah, no, I think we have that
Yeah.
at the office. It's black, right?
Black.
Yeah.
Very heavy. Yeah,
SI-77 or something.
yeah, something like that.
It's like a composer. Yeah,
Composer box.
most of the stuff, I kind of like the Japanese attitude in a way when they build. I remember when I grew up, also it's like the Sony they had this fetish to build as tiny products as possible, just because it was what do you say? It was so hard. So they just did it for this kind of like passion of, okay, we can actually do it this small, you know, like the Walkman and stuff like that. And it's the same with the OP1. I had I'm not sure if you remember that. It's like the VL tone was more or less in the same format. So I think I'm on a personal level. I'm very interested in that kind of, what do you say? Why you do things. To be, you want to make the best instrument in the world. It can be just that you want to make it the smallest, even if it's totally unpractic. I kind of like that approach. It's a little bit like life itself. Also, you have to have fun when you do stuff. You can't just be practical or logical.
I had a little keynote that I had done at a past thing that I did last month at the University of Victoria, but then I thought, gosh, I have a video of a live Buchla performance that I just got, and I could show you that, but I can't seem to connect properly to the internet. So unless somebody wants to give me their internet connection, can I connect to internet here? GT Visitor, GT Wi-Fi. That wasn't selected. You can close that, yeah. So I don't know, what would be more interesting to you, kind of like a historical run-through of me from my childhood on, or you know, playing the Buchla live, because maybe a lot of you haven't seen that. And I don't know if I can make that happen. Sunshine. Maybe a little of both? Okay. Let's see if that works. I did a performance at a festival in Italy. Here. Let's see if this works. Sure. See if this works. Okay. You're not getting the video? I have the HDMI plugged in. Okay. So this was a festival, and we just got the video on this. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I might skip around a lot. So I've been, for the last couple of years, I've been running around the world with an 18-panel unit Buchla. And my mission is to show the performability Buchla analog music system. I played it in the 70s. I worked for Don Buchla. And I grew up with like a 40-panel unit system, and I used to perform that in the 70s. And then it broke, and half of it was stolen, and I stopped. Then about 5 years ago, Buchla said to me, you know, if you're ever thinking of getting back into this, now is the time, because I'm going to sell the company. And so we made a deal, and I got a 200E, which is the new analog digital version of the original 200, which I could play in my sleep. You know, I played it for 10 years nonstop. And the 200E was actually not an improvement of the 200. Oddly, the constraints of digital thinking put some wrenches in the performability. You know, some things were menu driven, like the sequence. The main module that I use is actually a clone. It was the 248, or the multiple arbitrary function generator. And it allows you to take a sequencer, and I use a sequencer that has 4 sequences, 4 16-stage sequences that are the same ones I used in the 70s. And I matrix them into this multiple arbitrary function generator, and I can access them in any direction and in a combination of at least 2 at the same time. So let's skip ahead a little bit, and you'll hear some of that sequencer going on. So what you can do with the multiple arbitrary function generator, otherwise known as the MARF. Oh, we're not getting all the channels, I guess. Okay, so what this is doing right now is you use the MARF. It's like another layer of control above the sequencer. So you have, oh, well, this is just the sequencer. Let me go back, wait a minute. See if I can find that. I want to show you some specific techniques. Okay, so these sequences are feeding into the MARF, and there's a random waveform modulation that happens. Not the bass note that's regular. Dun, dun. Hear that? It's random. Something seems to be disappearing. I don't know what. Okay, so as we go on, because I don't want to show you this whole thing because it's long. Let's see where we are. But anyway, the whole improvisation becomes an improvisation. You have the materials of the sequences, so there are 4 16-stage sequences, and they're hard to access when they're in a digital sequencer. You know, in the old days, in the 200, and this is why I'm out performing, because I came from a background of what I look at now as the impossible. I worked for Don Buchla. I worked for Don Buchla after about 5 years after he first started his vision. His original vision was kind of, as Mort Sabatnik would say, to make a machine that would make sounds, interesting sounds, and then you would record the sound, and then you'd make another interesting sound, and you record that, and you'd build up a composition by layering the sounds. And that's how Mort Sabatnik worked. By the time I came along 5 years later, Don had advanced his idea of what he was doing. And he saw that what he was creating was a live, performable electronic music instrument without a keyboard, without a traditional keyboard. And so he was dedicated to making, an interface that was playable. What were some of the requirements of that? I mean, he had a lot of feedback as you're performing. Every control voltage had an intensity light, so you knew how strong that voltage was. You knew where the sequencer was at every stage. You knew where the random voltage was. You knew when the envelope triggered. You knew the intensity of the envelope. So there was feedback all through the system. I don't know how people play systems that don't talk back. When I sit in front of a typical Eurorack system, I'm like, what? What is going on here? So, Buchla, I think he needs to be studied because he kept a focus his entire life that he never veered from. He was always the maverick, he was always the oddball, but his vision was always to make a performable instrument. So, in those early days I performed. We always performed in quadraphonic because right from the beginning, the idea of moving the sound in space was organic to the whole thing. We even had, a voltage-controlled spring reverb, so you could create the illusion of a space getting bigger and smaller. And now I just got one of my Eventide H9s modified in Denmark. So, they made it so it has a control voltage. So for the first time, I can actually control voltage for a quadraphonic space. So, I think there's a huge gap that the beginning in the visionary stage of these instruments, there was a lot of advance made. And I think we need to go back and just look at what already happened. Even the latest version, as I say, the 200E, is missing a lot of what the 200 had. So it has memory, but it has a lot of issues. I mean, I won't go into it because they're just microcosmic and myriad. It's a problem. But you make the best of it. So let's listen to a little more music, see what we're doing. We're missing the track. So what this is, we're only getting one track channel maybe. So what this is doing is there's a random octave transposition. So what happens is you take these basic materials, the sequences, and I'm glad you're making a sequencer, because that's a really fundamental thing. And you have to access that material in a variety of ways. That's what gives it power. So through this matrixing in the MARF, which is, not a sequencer, it's what you feed the sequencer into, and then you can rhythmically combine it with the sequencer and do operations above that. So one of them is you can randomly access the stage by taking a pulsed random voltage and giving it a direction on the input. So, and then you can assign octave transpositions to various stages. And that brings out another melody range. So you're still using the same raw material, but you're giving it a new dimension. The whole process of performing on this is to keep it liquid, to keep it alive, to keep it in motion. The beauty and the magic of electronic music is that it changes. It's organic, and it flows, and it moves. And once it gets stuck, which is why I don't like samples, I don't like anything that gets frozen. And you have to, as a performer, your job really is to use your imagination and how to keep it moving. And it's a very mental job, you know, because you know instinctively where every control is. So you know when you hear something where it's coming from, you know if you need to change it, you know, instinctively where to go. So that's the building of the technique of interacting with that. And then you just are working with your emotional feedback, you know, what you feel like doing, what the audience inspires you to do, what seems to be, you know, getting a certain appreciation, and then you keep going in that direction. So I think that's the fascination, is that it's a journey. You don't know where you're going, but somebody's driving, and somebody you know, the audience, when they know you're in charge, you know, maybe you don't know what you're going to do, but you know how to do it. You can make choices and do it. They feel comfortable with that, and they'll go on that journey with you, wherever it is. So I don't even know where this goes. We have no sound now. So part of every, you know, the buchla is very hard to tune. And so I've become attracted to white noise, you know, and so every part of it, you know, a good part of my performance is just improvisation on white noise. I'm going to go a little further ahead. I know. I don't. That's a little animogue that I added to my performance. It's a lot of fun. It's an iPad app. Do you guys know that one? Yeah, everybody knows the animogue, right? So what you're hearing now is the same sequences that opened, but they're transformed into a different sonic, you know, presence. So that thing up on the left, when I touch that, that's the MARF, the multiple arbitrary function generator. quad. You have to imagine that the space, is you're immersed in the space. And you can tell when it gets stuck. It gets stuck really quickly. If you don't interact with it for like 3 or 4 bars, it's the machineness of it takes over. So the process of a good performance is that you're actually always in there, kind of directing the flow and changing it. These will be sounds that are moving, around the space. So it's kind of more interesting when you hear them moving. I actually don't know where the good parts are of this because I don't know this performance very well. But we can go ahead. Anyway, the way this concert ended was that the electricity stopped. But it's a real adventure. You go through, and the buchla, the thing about the buchla is that it has the sophistication to allow you to improvise. And this is a small buchla, Okay. So, okay, we can turn that down a little bit. Oh, okay, so, this is the H9. And, it's a graphic interface on the effect. And I've been trying to work. I've been working with an engineer at Moog for about a year because, my life is, my first time around, my instrument broke. And when you play a unique instrument, you feel very vulnerable. And so I wanted a backup. And so I thought, well, buchla passed away, and nobody over there at buchla can carry on his vision yet. Maybe that'll change. But I thought, well, I'll just work with a really high-level engineer, and I will, create a new instrument. And it is so humbling to think that you can do this because it doesn't happen overnight. Buchla spent his life doing this. And you can't even just say, well, this is what it could do, this is what it could do, this is what it could do. Can't we do that? And it's like, it's got to be in somebody's DNA. The engineer doesn't get it, unless it's deeply in, like you and your brother in the back seat, unless it has some deep organic connection to you, it doesn't stick. So, and I'm not an engineer. I do think this is a collaborative process. When I worked with buchla, he defined that there was the inside and the outside. And I wanted to learn about the inside, and he said, no. He said, you design the outside. Don't worry, we'll make the inside. He said, what do you need to touch? What do you need to turn? What do you want to control? And I've always kept that as my philosophy of instrument design. I think you can get carried away with the inside if you're an engineer. And I think that, to really have an optimum situation, you need somebody who's, it's collaborative. You need somebody, the musician, who's just going to be concerned with the outside. So I concentrate on the outside, the switches, the patches, the knobs, the lights, and I depend on engineers to, manifest. And so it isn't happening right now. It just doesn't. But also, here, one last thing, because we are in an instrument group. Part of the thing is that, in technology, it's a liquid form. It keeps changing. So when I play the bukla, I realize that I'm playing something that's like a tank from World War II, almost. It's a big piece of metal with a lot of knobs and dials. Meanwhile, there are all these graphic interfaces and dynamic interfaces. And Bukla did have some of those. He had the thunder and the lightning, and he did deal with other interfaces. But I think that the analog performable instrument of the future has to solve that problem of how you integrate the graphic interfaces with the hardware. You need the hardware because you need to touch something. You need to feel the knobs. You need to connect. I know there are things that are all software and there are wonderful graphic things. I don't know everything. I just, come from one approach. But I love it. I love being able to reach for those things and knowing what they're going to do. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Maybe we'll wait for questions for Dan, for everyone.
No questions. And we're all asleep. I'm asleep. But yeah.
Not a question, it's a comment.
Mm.
This is the first time I've heard the process described. So I instinctively know what it is, although I have a lot of technical questions, but I understand it for the first time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have that mic stand and that audio cable? Can I see if my screen appears up here? Maybe. HDMI? Anyone? Video switch? There we are. We're here. Excellent. Okay. So I'm gonna keep this to 15 minutes. I hope. Oh God damn it! There we go. I thought Suzanne was going to show a picture of her in the 70s, so I had a picture of me in the 70s too. So this is not Edgar Varese, it's me. That's back when I had hair here and more here. But Edgar Varese said something really cool that I take as inspiration. And he went on to look at the loudspeaker as an instrument, the turntable as an instrument, and the theremin as an instrument. And he was really taken with that idea that, we weren't done yet, just because violins had gotten to this beautiful point. Also, really, really old instruments are cool too. So that's me playing a 3,500-year-old seashell in the mountains in Peru, where they were discovered at 15,000 feet, and a whole collection of 30 of them. And so my motivation is sort of look at the instruments we have, look at the interactions we have, look at the objects in our everyday life that we have evolved with our ergonomics or we with them, and see what we can come up with. And so much of my research has been in the double E sort of domain. It's been on computational acoustics. And so this is sort of everything that we know about physical modeling, actually synthesis by physical modeling. So you're hearing plucked and bowed strings, models. The singer is a model. This is all direct. There's no samples involved with this. This is actually a synthesis from physics. Drums and plates, bars, particle models, the radiation from instruments. These are all things that I've researched and written papers on and stuff like that. But the thing we realize is that if we have these models, just because you have a really good model of a saxophone, you don't know how to control it. And so Yamaha found this out with the VL1, and Korg found this out with the Prophecies. They put these wonderful wind instruments in, and trying to control it from a keyboard and a ribbon controller is, not very natural. And so I was working on brass models and physics models and things like that, and at the time I went to Karma. That year, Dexter Morrow got a sabbatical to go leave Colgate and come to Karma and study, and so together we worked together and created the Cook-Morrill trumpet, which is basically an augmented trumpet. It's just things you can hang onto a trumpet without doing too much grave damage to it that extend the trumpet player. Other... I don't care about that. Other instruments as well, looking at other wind instruments, and also at other brass-like things. And so at the same time, I'm historically a trombone player. I was a double major in trombone and voice. And although in the middle of conservatory, at the urging of my trombone teacher, I became solely a voice major because he told me I would never amount to anything. So, and indeed I did not, but I became a world-renowned seashell player. And so with that, one of the interactions that we discovered with the trumpet is you can tilt it, and matter of fact, you do quite often, even in big bands and things like that. And so that's a dimension. And also one of the controls for a seashell, if you're playing it musically, is you move your hand in and out of it. And so this gesture of moving the hand in and out became a glove that I built that basically just fits on my hand and measures the tilt and my tilt. And so I have a demo of this, but I'm afraid to do it because it actually involves live capture of the seashell in the microphone here. And this stage seems to be a high feedback zone, and so we'll hold off on that. Next time I come, I will do a seashell piece for a concert or something. But anyway, another area is look at the objects in our everyday life. Bill Verplank, who's sort of a god of HCI, he helped Xerox, Apple, and Microsoft design their mice. And so he's Mr. User Study, and he really knows how to optimize ergonomics and usefulness. He challenged us in our sort of HCI studies, and I also worked with him at Interval Research. He said, why can't anything in my computer space be at all as gratifying as working in the kitchen, just, making an omelet? Why can't I feel as expressive on my computer? And so I set out to make a whole bunch of musical kitchenware. That thing you were seeing is called actually the Philip glass. It's a glass full of electronics. When you pick it up, it turns on, and there's a bunch of FSRs, but you don't know what they do. But it sort of doesn't matter because it's all this looping, multi-timbral musical composer stuff. That's part of a bigger project called P-Ray's Cafe, which is just a bunch of kitchenware. I was also looking at shaker objects and working on particle models at the time. So actually, out of that came a project where these are my shaker models that I was working on. And so here's a nickel inside a mug. So that's a particle model. That's actually physics being calculated that models the particle moving around. There's a maraca, some sleigh bells. No samples, so I'm actually shaking the sleigh bells. And so out of that, I made an interface that does that. There we go. So here's, I'm controlling the maraca at that point, but there's a dime in a mug. But since I had this microcontroller in here, and it was mainly just to measure acceleration, I realized also this was much more meaningful for a lot of reasons, because I had lots of instructions left over in the little tiny 2K instruction memory. And so I decided just reading an accelerometer was kind of a waste of good computing power. So here's the coffee mug in a different, so it's actually telling me the value of the accelerometer at this time, and reading 4 FSRs and 2 little buttons that I can move up and down. And in fact, if I turn it on in this mode, it's a trumpet controller. Oops, I seem to have lost. Hold on. I think when I turned it on, it actually, now I have to find simple synth. This is not trivial. I think it actually pushed a sustain pedal, which has caused us to stick all the notes. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, kill simple synth. Doing my taxes, or trying to. All right, we're back on. Here's the interface, and here's the trumpet. Oh, it thinks it's a piano now. Don't you hate that? By the way, I built this in 1996, and it still works today, because it just puts out MIDI. I've dropped it, I broke it, I glued it back together. Everybody's happy. So it doesn't hold coffee. It used to, if you take the controller out. But why is it squirrely? Tilt is the overtone. So we still had cycles left over, so I made an improvisatory jazz band. There we go. Tonal modes that it's drawing the notes from. I just push one of the buttons. And I can do a little timbale solo by not pressing so hard on the drummer. Tito Puente joins us. So that's one of my, not my earliest interface, but it's probably my most persistent. I'm the least frustrated by it, but it always works when I take it out. TSA is a nightmare, but you'll see in this bag with these interfaces I brought, I have a technical paper on each object. And not that they could read it, but here's a picture of the coffee mug and what it's for and what it does. And there's a description, and sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, moving really quickly ahead, I will do less demos and more other stuff. There we go. So, as a singer, and also I did my PhD thesis in singing synthesis. So this is my singer named Sheila from 1989, which I did on a Nex machine for my PhD dissertation. And the problem with models like this is, if you think a sax model has a lot of free parameters in terms of reed stiffness, embouchure, breath pressure, and fingering, a vocal model is essentially, that intimate instrument that has a lot of bandwidth from our brain going to it, and we all grow up babbling to learn to control it. And so it's not really a natural fit. That's the block diagram. There are over 60 parameters to control that model in real time. So I started looking at ways to map, few to many. These are all computer screen graphical interfaces, but I also started looking at ways to control this using some kind of controller. And so the accordion, in a way, is kind of a natural fit, at least for pitch and breathing. So the next thing, I'm actually squeezing her vocal tract. This is a physical model of the human voice, and so tube shape is what controls the sound. So I'm doing that. There she's singing famous Rachmaninoff vocalese. And for one of you here, here's some overtone singing. So I worked with Colby Leiter on this, and we eviscerated a bunch of accordions. We took the reeds out, put speakers inside, and then used it as a controller, put breath pressure sensors and things like that. I'd like to just move forward. Maggie is a concertina version of that. That's the one I sort of travel with now, but that got broken when I went to Kyoto because their security, when they searched it when I wasn't there, turned the switch on and left it on. And so it heated up and melted things. Fortunately, it didn't burst into flames and crash the airplane because I wasn't there. I'd like to go forward. More voice controllers. The cow, which is a controller with everything on it that I knew how to do, breath pressure, FSRs, tilt sensors, buttons, haptic feedback, linear potentiometer that could find its way to positions and use as a scraper or a vocal controller. Another one, the voice-oriented melodica interface device, also called the VOMID, which is basically a Korg microcontroller that's had a bunch of stuff added to it. Multiple FSRs, a breath pressure sensor, 3-axis of tilt, and some extra buttons. And out of all this controller work, I had this crazy grad student named Dan Truman who put in his thesis, what if we had an orchestra of controllers and computer-mediated instruments? And so out of that was born the Princeton Laptop Orchestra, soon followed the Stanford Laptop Orchestra, Princeton, Stanford, Oslo, Boulder, the MoPhO, the Mobile Phone Orchestra of Stanford, Michigan State, Kalamazoo, I forget who all these people are, Arizona, and Plort Grew and Grew. This is the left side is us playing with the American Composers Orchestra in Carnegie Hall. The right side is us playing with So Percussion and Matmos, and fielding an orchestra of 35 laptop players. Each laptop player has their own speaker. There is no house sound. Everything comes from the player. And very often our gestural control device of choice is the laptop itself, but we're using it in non-typing, checking your email kinds of ways. We're blowing on the microphone to control it like Smuel's ocarina, or we're using the trackpad as a bow, or we're using the tilt sensors back when they had them before the drives went solid state. So the last little thing I'll do is more extension of this idea of the singer. And so not just controlling vocal synthesis, but also looking at some of my pieces for augmented singer and choir. Oh, I did want to show you one thing before I do that, is that model that I played you of the singing synthesizer, which only ran on the Next machine in 1988 and 89, I've kept porting it forward. So the minute it could run on a laptop, the C version of that, I made that work. And so, so here she is. This is actually running in real time. That was the first song ever sung by a computer, Max Matthews with John Kelly and Carol Lochbaum in Bell Labs, 1960. This is that Daisy singer's, great granddaughter, basically, the same kind of model. But I can control it in real time. But it's not a particularly, I have a 1 pixel interface into this entire model with 60 plus parameters. So I worked on lots of controllers, and a lot of those, the VOMID, the cow, the squeeze boxes, as you saw. And then most recently, I've been working on one that is a glove. It's 2 gloves, actually. Fits on my hand. Is that the way this goes? Yeah, I think it is. This goes? I don't even know how to wear it anymore. Yeah, that's how it goes. Each of these little gewgaws fits on my fingers. These are basically just switches. It's just like a really steampunk way of putting switches on your fingers. So these are copper pads, and when they touch, they close. Really reliable. I went through a whole lot of grief 3D printing fingertips with switches in them and FSRs, and then I realized that it was never going to work as well as just this super ghetto way of sensing how your fingers close. But it has 2 axes of tilt. Goes over to the other hand, which has 2 axes of tilt, actually 3 axes of tilt, and 2 sensors on my elbows. So I basically, and we'll see this in just a second. So really quickly, I'll run through some singer interfaces, either to control vocal models or to augment singers. Last section. This is a piece for Lorx Aeterna was a piece for the Princeton Laptop Orchestra, but I made it the Princeton Laptop Choir. So these people are singing, and I'm using the mic in the computer to capture their voices. When they lean forward, it captures their voice. When they lean back, it is captured, and then they can pitch shift it with tilts. So I've turned this group of 8 singers into 40, basically. And there's some machine learning in here and some machine listening. And when they say a particular sound, it goes to the next section of the piece and walks through that. Here's some other pieces. We'll look at those now. The idea of augmenting the singer is a lot of singers, especially early music singers and studio singers, work with a music stand. And so that's kind of a nice place with a lot of bandwidth if you know where to put it. And so the singer's speaker stand is what I used here. I think there's a movie here. There's supposed to be a movie here. Doesn't work. Never mind. Choir folder. So choirs stand there prim and proper with their choir folders. Why waste all that space on just music for them to sing? Why not put a wireless transmitter, a wireless receiver, embed some speakers in that sucker? Here's the actual score of what I'm singing. And here's an iPhone running Touch OSC, sending signals over. And, oh. I'm flailing away talking about this. And there it is. Okay. So multiple iPhones. This iPhone that sits in here is actually used as a camera, which I call the nostril cam. It actually documents what the singer's doing during the piece, so you can put it back together to get a lovely view, kind of like this. Here's another one. This one actually had an embedded Surface tablet in it, and so this does not go out to a computer, and there's no wireless anything. It basically is all on board. There's a microphone in the folder. There's a computer in the folder, and there's 2 speakers in the folder. And I'm also wearing 2 bigger speakers under a big floppy shirt on my belt. And so the sound comes out of me. It's this idea of having the object be the object, making the musical instrument seem like it's really making the sound. Finally, this guy. And so I'll finish up by playing you a little chunk of this Papageno, Papagena, Rubato Duetto. Shruti box start. I apologize for the tabla samples that are coming, which I'm controlling with my fingers. So the idea of this is when my arms are in one position, I'm controlling me, and I'm capturing my voice, and I'm controlling the backing instruments. And when my arm is in a different position, my singer appears, Sheila, and I'm controlling her. And so it's really a duet. Pay no attention to the right side. The only thing that's really going on is the left side. I'll bring Sheila out. So when I bring my right elbow up, the singer will magically appear. There she is. The way I'm controlling pitch is the bend of one elbow selects the octave, and the four fingers on my right hand are brass valves. So I'm actually controlling her just as if I were fingering a 4-valve tuba or something like that. So I think with that, I will say thanks. Now go build some stuff. Questions for anybody? Yeah.
Do you know controllers that actually use? Do you know, or have you used controllers that actually use the voice or the mouth to control?
Yes, there's the mouth. There's a couple of projects over history. One of the coolest and most amusing was called the mouthicizer. That's actually a camera. So you take a boom mic, cut the mic off, and put a tiny camera there. Take out the infrared filter, so you're measuring actually the heat in the lips and the tongue. And they used it as a controller for basically a wah-wah pedal or opening and closing a filter. And so there's a really cool couple of demos, videos of that around that are pretty good. The mouthicizer. There's also Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona had a project of voice-controlled instruments. So it was kind of like playing a bass by going boom, boom, ding, dum, dum, boom, ding. So it's like beatboxing but with pitch, and it controls a bass synth. And so you're singing the bass synth. And they also had one for effects as well, but it was doing analysis on the voice. Other than that, some facial marker stuff with computer vision as well, with face recognition and landmark detection to control some things. I actually have a project that I did with Ben Knapp, who's Dean of Arts at University of Virginia, but we were grad students together. And so we did a project with face-controlled choir things. So it takes, someone who doesn't sing and can turn them into a singer in a way, or at least a controller. That's probably in my quick memory. But I'm working on a book, which I got a Guggenheim for in 2003, and it's still not done, but and it never will be, but I will eventually stab it and throw it out into the world. But it's called La Bella Voce e la Macchina, which is the beautiful voice in the machine. It's a history of technology and singing. So those things are in the instrumental voice chapter, looking at the voice as an instrument or the voice as a controller for instruments. But it has 26 chapters, and it really goes way back in history and looks at everything from echo to architecture to castratis to anything that can be technology and anything that can be expressive voice. So look for it soon. Maybe I'll just start leaking it out and acting in outrage that someone published it without my permission, and then I'll have deniability.
I am pretty curious what someone as knowledgeable as you would think of the Vocaloid pod. Are you familiar with Vocaloid?
Yes. Yeah.
Cinema.
When I was working on my dissertation, Javier Serra, who's head of the music tech program at Pompeu Fabra, was working on his dissertation, and I was physical modeling, and he was spectral modeling, and his thesis ended up licensed by Yamaha and turned into the Vocaloid. And I think the Vocaloid is an amazing cultural phenomenon. I love that they're fans of Hatsune Miku, and they have giant concerts with her projected holographically. And I kind of like the idea. When my dissertation came out and Sten Ternström was working on his dissertation in singing and choir synthesis at the same time in Stockholm, there was a big buzz in the business press that soon we would be copying the voices of real singers and, long dead singers. So, if you want David Bowie to do a duet, just, recreate him. We're not there yet, thank God. But it's, I think it's really interesting from a technological standpoint. I think it's really interesting. There is a company that does. Roger Ebert used it before he was a laryngectomy and lost his voice. They archived his voice and gave him a speech synthesizer that sounded more like him than it did anybody else. And so I think that's a really cool use of archiving a voice, especially with someone's permission. But it won't be long. We'll hear the first lawsuit, sometime soon, that somebody, it used to be in the old days you'd hire somebody to sound like Bette Midler and then get sued after she refused to do your Ford commercial, and or Tom Waits to do Fritos, but in the future we'll have one of Gil's students or somebody do Bette Midler, so they can be sued. But it will come. But I think the Vocaloid's an amazing thing. I don't think it's gotten a lot of traction in terms of real use. We don't see. It's not like Autotune. It didn't take over the world, and it's everywhere we look, and you have to have it in order to sell a record. And so, thank God.
So
Yeah.
is there any thought to going into the future? Is there any thought going into the future to never have any live audio at all and go directly from notation and lyrics to digital song?
That's sort of what the Vocaloid does. Vocaloid, you can give it sheet music and lyrics, and it will render you a sung track, and then you can go back and fix it up and tweak it. And so that's sort of what it promised to do. And, and you could argue that that's kind of what taking a MIDI file, running it through a synthesizer, and recording it, and selling it.
Except for the vocal.
Yeah, except for the vocal part, yeah. But that's what the Vocaloid purported to do, and has been used for that. And so,
So I have two questions for all three of you. You can answer all of them or pick and choose. One is about look at this audience here in terms of gender diversity and what's your thought about that. And no matter how much we try in music technology to bring gender diversity. It's for all of you, but yes, Susan probably maybe can take it first. The second one is, if we look at the 20th century, there have been some instruments that stick. We have the saxophone, we have maybe the theremin, the electric guitar, you can say. Turntables, and maybe the 60s, the synthesizer. Not too many instruments that I can think of, maybe you can, stick later, and some of the whole nine communicate, one instrument, one performance, one performer, and then guy. And the question is why, or maybe the question, am I wrong? And if not, why and what people here can do to, and not go this way, and maybe have the instruments. So, diversity and stickiness. Diversity.
Okay. Diversity. Okay. Honestly, I didn't notice that there were no women here until you mentioned it. And now, yeah, there are. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Yeah. Oh my. This is an old story, and it hasn't changed. And so we're now looking at it again and saying maybe we need to actually actively do something about it, because it is not about women not caring about this field or not being good at this field or not wanting to participate. I think it's just that, we need to change the balance, because women are uncomfortable, men are uncomfortable with women, women are uncomfortable with men, because there's a threat in this field about, am I smart? Do I know what's going on?
Am I good enough? Also, there's a prejudice against women that they're not suited to this kind of thing, that they don't have the, I think the whole technology myth is a myth. It's like saying cooking is technology. It is technology, but basically it's done by somebody being in the kitchen and interacting with something in real time and creating something. So this idea that technology is this, difficult, abstract, it has two sides. It might be that, but it's also, I relate to technology like a kitty cat. It's warm and fuzzy, and I enjoy it, and it talks back to me, and it's friendly, and it's a relationship. And I think that if you can develop your relationship with the technology, you're comfortable. I don't know. Anyway, what do you think? So you're sleeping. I want to know exactly what you think. Yeah, you.
What I think. Well, I just had a discussion today with a friend of mine who's here, Astrid. Yeah. What I think. We discussed about the fact that the problem for women is not to enter this world, but to remain and have what they deserve in terms of a position, respect, connections. There's a lot of sexism that is not that is applied to women, but it's not even on purpose sometimes. It's a cultural thing, and this makes women's life in a music tech domain very complicated. And so probably building a community and connections between different communities might be a good way to preserve their positions, let's say. And another thing that is pretty interesting and that's made me think about is that there are some amazing women in music tech, and there are many, many mediocre men, but we don't see mediocre women because they tend to be pushed away. They tend to be blamed, and this is really not a good thing. And we have to fight also this middle situation, this in-between stage, because there's no point. On the other side, we have amazing role models, and it's just a matter to connect these role models to students and other newcomers that totally deserve someone that can guide them towards a path. That's what I think.
I learned a lot from that. Thank you. Women talk about this amongst themselves, but we often don't get, what you guys think, and I'm sure what you're thinking is changing now, right? Because it's more of a topic than it was not too long ago. We've become aware. Awareness is the first part. The women, I'm teaching a women's technology class at Berkeley College of Music, and what the women say is that the men don't even realize that they undermine the authority of the woman, just by body language or by some subtle, intervention that just says, "Wait a minute, let me do this because let me show you, I'm better," and maybe they are better, who knows? But it disempowers at this point. We need some special awareness about this, I think. So a little extra care in your male persona to leave a little distance for the woman to have a little more space to actually be there, right? Instead of receding. So anyway, we're all learning. For me, I'm surprised because I came from, I was doing this in the 60s and 70s, and we thought that everything was changing, that it was just this linear progression that was going straight up, and that's not what happened. It went up and then it went plunging down,
got worse. And now we're at the crest of another wave, so we have an opportunity historically at this very, very time to put in place some mechanisms that will protect us for the next down, the next wave down. So,
What was the next? New that stick. I liked, Perry. You mentioned the turntable, and I don't think any of us could come up with the idea that the turntable would turn into an instrument. So I've been thinking a lot of this during the day, that we, in a way, we all build a lot of machines and projects, but we are all in it together, and it's not a revolution. It's a very slow evolution. You find a little detail, and then you build on that, and I guess all of you here today will go back home with something new, a new impression in some way, and I think what sticks is, it's also, I think it's where we will be in the future. If it's the whole society. I'm thinking about the electric guitar, for example. You couldn't build the electric guitar in the 15th century because there was no electricity, and you couldn't build small portable synths that we do 10 years ago, because we follow the mobile phone trend and the technology there. So we talked a lot about AI during the dinner. What will happen if if it generates elevator music, and what will happen to instruments? And I think that technology, the whole AI thing, will add something completely unexpected to the whole scene, I guess.
So I would sort of argue that the DAW, the digital audio workstation, is a musical instrument that stuck. It completely eliminated tape and and a lot of mixing consoles and everything, and allowed us to make records on an airplane, if you will. But also, I think the large class of pads and controllers that DJs use and we use, and from the Monome to the Chaos Pad, but that whole class of things, I'm going to lump all those together and say you see a lot of those. So even when a DJ plays a wedding, he's got a pad out there with some control, some expressive control, if you will, that's there, even if it's just hammering out presets or something. But and we have to remember that Adolph Sax made 100 saxophones of different kinds, and only 4 or 5 kind of stuck. And he was the one who was making all of them. And so if we hammer it down to one model number made by one manufacturer, then the Monome is pretty popular because people build them themselves, and Yamaha has a similar pad with lights in it or something like that. But so I think I would class that, and then other technologies that came and stuck, the wireless invisible singer's headset that's in every Broadway singer and every Madonna backup singer, even though it's not on because they're not singing, they're just dancing. That's certainly a new interface, but it's a technology and it's incremental improvement over this. But that's probably it, I guess. But
well, I think that the analog modular system has stuck. Did I go out?
Yes, that's one reason I just disappeared. I'm sure you all know that the
first, concept synthesizer was mechanical. Thaddeus Cahill in 1910. 20 boxcars of a train. This thing was, the telephone had just come in, and he thought, well, maybe if I make this central music production system, we can pipe it through the telephone, and people can get it. Sound familiar? Sound like Spotify? Sound like, so I always like to separate concepts from expression and, physical presence. And I think we need to look at what concepts stick. Because the concept is the, reigning design need or, idea, creative idea. And then it marches through time in different expressions depending on how we express. And what I find interesting about this generation, for me, is that they're actually looking backwards in many ways. We were on this trajectory of everything getting digital and everything going a certain way. And then all of a sudden it came to a stop and they said, wait a minute, let's go back to vinyl. Let's go back to cassettes. Let's go back to analog. And I'm so happy that we did that because we missed something, the things that drive the market and all of that are not always healthy things. They made the CD because they could republish a lot of music and make a lot of money. It wasn't a better medium. So you have to look and so I think this time around with analog, we're not saying, hey, analog is dead and now it all has to be digital. Maybe not. It's like you don't say, hey, let's throw out the violin because it's an old technology. And so I think that analog has stuck, and I think we can value it ongoing, even though there are going to be a million other ways to express, some of the same concepts. But, for me, the concept of analog is hands-on, interactive, in the moment, live generation of composition, sound. So, okay, bye.
I have just one thought. There was a lot of you that used Ableton today, and I've been thinking, it feels to me, because you built a lot of controllers but you used Ableton as a sound engine. So this is a question to you and to Perry also, that maybe this to me it feels like some kind of reaction from your side that you missed something with Ableton or the DAW world. Is that so, or why don't you just use Ableton? Yeah, but only Ableton. You don't need anything more. Is it that you feel that you can't interact with Ableton in a good way, or?
We're down to one mic.
You have a second. No, we have a second.
Okay, so.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I think, when you're able to see stuff and feel stuff, that has a big difference on you, on your overall, experience of music. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I feel the same. And that's why I want to ask an expert like Perry, that I remember when the DX7 came with the FM synthesizer, it was like a completely new sound. And I kind of missed that part of the development, like the synth engines. What's the next thing? Something that you never heard before?
I don't know.
Like physical modeling?
Yeah, like physical modeling, but it's hard to control. The early days, yeah. And, the DX7 was the first affordable digital sound. There were samplers which were too expensive and couldn't store too much. And the DX7 had this, bright, annoyingly bright digitalness to it
And and you could do a passable Fender Rhodes, and you could do a passable B3, and one person could carry it, which was amazing. And so and still being one of the best-selling keyboard synthesizers of all time, it only sold about 40,000 units, when it's all said and done. And so it stuck, but the market was not. The thing that boggles my mind is that we at Smule, with a digital instrument, can reach 250 million people, and they're making music with it. They share it, and they figure out ways to break it in really cool ways and play with it and things like that. Which is, so I think the very technology you said, the mobile phone came with all the sensors in there. That's a musical instrument that's stuck for now, until we get rid of cell phones and people say, what was that and how ridiculous was that? We carried those big weird things around, but I don't know. I fully expected, I will state, to get VR sickness during this, because I was pretty sure there were going to be some VR or augmented reality submissions. And I was really not looking forward to feeling ill, because I have a lot of trouble with those things, the headset. I mean, I spend some time in them, and I try to keep my eye on them and stuff, but that is certain to be a space where we will see things happen, and and who knows what. But yeah, I don't know what else was there.
I think spatial sound is sticking. It tried to stick, in the 70s when they had 8 tracks and they had quad, and it didn't stick because there was no content. So they had the technology, but they didn't have anything to pump through it that made any sense. But I think now, this time around, because we have all these interfaces, home theater, and we have, the revival of analog, the instruments that can move sound in a meaningful way, I think we're going to get a lot, space is going to stick.
I have another thing that we talked about today that I want to ask you, is that how many of you want to commercialize your IDs? Almost all of you are.
Which ones? Okay, you. Okay, you. Who else?
Because I remember, when we started to build instruments, we talked a lot about this experience when you open your closet, or finding some old stuff in the basement 20 years later, especially electronics, and when you turn the machine on, it actually works, and your old, recording is still there, or like the coffee cup. It's quite interesting to think in a long perspective also, to see, and that's what I miss with DAW, in the DAW world, that you need software updates, and the battery will eventually die, and have you thought about that kind of things? Okay, good.
Sorry, I'll say on the commercialization aspect is that being at Karma, I built a lot of these at Karma, some at Interval Research, but I was always demoing them and showing them to people, and Dave Smith would always pass through, and he'd always laugh at me, and he'd say, "Oh, you'll sell 2 of those." And so I said, "No, I won't, because I'm only going to make this one." And so there is a notion, as especially in a capitalist society, that something's only good if you can get people to pay you for it. And and to some degree that's sort of true, but in terms of these objects, just the comedic value of this throughout my life has been well worth this time I spent building it. And I actually, this almost got commercialized, believe it or not. Starbucks was looking at a way to promote the idea of the cup as a social phenomenon. You know, the cup of coffee, the cup of tea, and they were actually they had hired some high-end consulting firm, and they came to Princeton and talked to myself and Marilyn Wolf, who's on the faculty here now, and we met with them and showed them this and the Philip glass, and they laughed and thought it was really interesting, but they could not in any way figure out what in the world they would do with that. But but you know, commercialization is certainly an important avenue to look at, and everyone should go through the exercise. Possibly not everyone, but most people should go through the exercise a few times. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment, really, that commercialization is not the only method of distribution. There's ways to make multiples without necessarily selling them. You could just make them.
Or open source the design, which Arduino did, and which other people did. Mono sort of did. So, yeah.
So I had a question. I was curious, what music technology have you seen out there that least gels with your personal aesthetic?
That we've seen where?
I guess you don't have to, that least gels with your personal aesthetic. Like, you'd look at it and be like, oh, this is cool, but I guess I really wouldn't use this.
Not today. Yeah. Oh, not today, right.
Yeah, like in general, yeah. Like, sorry.
I don't like MIDI. This is like an AA meeting for digital. My name is Suzanne. I don't like MIDI. And okay.
I like MIDI. I'm more into like wireless MIDI. I think that could be something, you know. Do you use that already? And latency is also just something, that you work on as well. I think latency is quite interesting because a lot of devices today, almost all devices, have too much latency, which is a big obstacle, right, in music creation. And I think probably that's one part why you like your old Buchla system, because it's like zero latency, right?
I at once love and am offended by many sub-branches of electronic dance music, because it's more of a tribal drum beat for people to do drugs and dance, which is great. I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing too, but it's not music. And so the Saturday Night Live with Andy Samberg, and the audience is waiting for the drop, and it's just a loop. His laptop's just looping, and then when he finally hits that one thing, all their heads explode. It's to me that's a wonderful cultural tribal moment, but it's not an expressive musical event in a way. So anyway, it's but I listen to it. I think it's great in a lot of ways. So I'll leave it at that.